So here's some positive news for everybody. We're only 2 weeks through the season. That means there's a lot of season left to go. And especially if your team hasn't got off to an ideal start, there's time to fix it. The clock's going to start ticking pretty quickly, but 2 weeks does not a season make. So let's take a look back at the week that was, week 2 of the 2023 NFL season. And it all started last Thursday night in prime time. The Eagles took advantage of the Vikings on the ground, got 175 yards from DeAndre Swift, and they held off Minnesota late 34-28. As you shift over to the early Sunday matchups, the Falcons were able to come storming back with 13 unanswered fourth quarter points. Bijan Robinson had his first 100-plus yard game on the ground, and the Falcons beat the Packers 25-24. Josh Allen had an efficient, not necessarily spectacular, but efficient 3 passing touchdown outing. The Bills blast the Raiders 38-10. If you're one of those Raiders fans, I want them to take for Caleb Williams or one of these other quarterbacks, you got to sit there and say, why the fuck did this team win week 1? Screwing everything up. You might not win too many more, and McDaniels might be gone soon. The Cincinnati Bengals, it's becoming a recurring theme with Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor. They get off to early slow starts and especially struggle offensively. They certainly did again Sunday. The Ravens were able to hold them off and win 27-24. The Seahawks, in a matchup that I think most of us assumed was going to be high scoring and interesting, certainly was. Rode Geno Smith's 328 passing yards, Kenneth Walker III's 2 touchdown runs, and a pick 6, among other things, to beat the Lions in overtime 37-31. That game delivered for sure. Nick Folk hit a 41-yard game winner in overtime, and the Titans are able to slide past the Chargers 27-24. And in case you're wondering, what does this lighter represent? It represents the fire under the ass of Brandon Staley, the Chargers head coach. That seat's getting warm, buddy. How the fuck you have Herbert and some of the talent on that team and you're 0-2? Holy shit. Meanwhile, Baker Mayfield. That's right, Baker Mayfield goes for over 300 yards through the air. Shaq Barrett says, hey, the Bears are going to continue to try this. By the third time, I'm going to figure out what the fuck they're doing with this screen. Pick 6 up your ass. Bucks beat the Bears 27-17. Patrick Mahomes goes over 300 yards passing with a couple of touchdowns. It wasn't pretty, but the Chiefs have enough to be able to hold off the Jaguars 17-9. Anthony Richardson had 2 touchdown runs early before he gets knocked out with a concussion. Second straight week, he's left the game early due to injury. Gardner Minshew steps in, helps steer the Colts to a 31-20 victory over the Titans. As you switch to the late Sunday afternoon games, it was another day, another 100-yard outing on the ground for Christian McCaffrey. The 49ers continue their recent dominance against the Rams, winning 30-23. But hey, the Rams made sure they got in that field goal. Got to cover the spread, right, bitches? Yeah. It wasn't looking very good for the Giants early on Sunday. You're looking at them and you say, Christ, after week 1, and then what you saw in the first half, this looks like the team that's tanking, not the Cardinals. At least the Cardinals are trying. At least the Cardinals are competing. But the Giants were able to overcome a 21-point deficit. Graham Gano hit a 34-yard field goal to win it. Arizona goes down 31-28, keeping their tank hopes alive. The Cowboys defense forces 4 turnovers, gets 3 sacks. It was a rough day for Zach Wilson. They easily coast by the Jets 30-10. Somehow, some way, the Broncos pissed away an 18-point second quarter lead, then managed to rally late with a last-second Hail Mary that actually is successful, score a touchdown, then they missed the 2-point conversion, and the fucking Commanders are 2-0 and at 35-33. There's no stopping Washington now against, maybe a halfway decent team. That might be the impediment there. As you switch over to Sunday night, Raheem Mostert had over 120 yards rushing and a couple of touchdowns. The Dolphins sent the Patriots to 0-2 with a 24-17 victory. As you switch over to Monday night for the doubleheader we didn't fucking ask for and didn't want, and we certainly didn't need. Tony Jones hit a pair of 2-yard touchdown runs. The Saints beat the Panthers in Bryce Young's Monday Night Football debut 20-17, and it was ugly. Probably not as ugly, though, as the game that came afterwards. Nick Chubb goes down for the year. It's always cringe having to watch Deshaun Watson now. Kenny Pickett was terrible. T.J. Watt gets a fumble return in the fourth quarter, returns it for a touchdown. Steelers win 26-22. Yeah, it was a bad night of football last night. In terms of stars of the week for week 2, I'm going to go in a different direction with quarterback. I'm going to go C.J. Stroud. His team around him is really bad. His offensive line stunk, gave up like 6 sacks, but he hung in there. And Bears fans, newsflash, did you know that you could have a young quarterback, sit down, that could throw for 300 passing yards or more? Now you're going to say, well, yeah, of course, you can do that in 2 to 3 games. That's the kind of league. No, 1 game. C.J. Stroud with 30 of 47 for 384 yards and 2 touchdowns. Have no idea what that's like. So even though his team lost, you could say, yeah, some of that was garbage time, certainly. But the fact is, he hung tough on a rough day. In terms of running backs, DeAndre Swift, 28 carries, 175 yards, and a touchdown. Big reason why the Eagles were able to find a rhythm in the second half offensively and beat the Vikings. Mike Evans, 6 receptions, 171 receiving yards, 1 egregious offensive pass interference push-off that wasn't called. 1 touchdown was a big part of why the Bucs beat the Bears on Sunday. And then the Chiefs' defense, only 9 points allowed against the Jags, 4 sacks and a turnover. They held the Jaguars under 300 total yards of offense. Now, there were a couple of throws that were this close, a couple of plays that were this close to being touchdowns for the Jags, and if a couple of them, the receivers are able to keep their feet in bounds, it's a whole different story here, but it wasn't. And the Chiefs deserve credit for playing well defensively. Big win for them on the road. In terms of biggest winners and losers in week number 2, I'll start with the biggest winners, the Ravens. They're at 2-0 now. They're leading their division, and they beat the Bengals, which could come into play later on in the year when it comes to tiebreakers. And then I look at the Kansas City Chiefs coming off that week 1 close loss to the Lions, go on the road in week 2 against a potential contending team in the Jags and get the job done. And that's with that offense still not catching fire, getting into its normal rhythm. In terms of biggest losers, Bears football, because of course it fucking was. Go on the road and they put up that shit show. Matt Eberflus is calling the defense. It's going to be different. Yeah, they blitzed more and they still sucked. They still couldn't get to the fucking quarterback. Well, it was week 1, so they'll figure out a different game plan. Yeah, the first drive was great, and then most of the rest of the game fucking sucked offensively. That's Bears football, and they're 0-2, and fuck life. The Los Angeles Chargers, speaking of 0-2, you actually have a legit quarterback in Justin Herbert. You have legit talent on that team. Brandon Staley, that seat's fired up, bitch. And then the Denver Broncos. Could you imagine investing all that they did in terms of draft pick capital in Russell Wilson, then having to double down and invest a first-round pick in a trade to bring in Sean Payton, and they're fucking 0-2, and they've lost to the Raiders and the Commanders. It's bad. It's really, really bad for Denver. Now, I'm going to close this out, and we're going to talk about my 2-minute drill. 0-2 teams, right? Every year, teams will go 0-2, and some of them can end up clawing their way back into the playoff race, and some of them do not. Now, it is reasonable to assume at this point that the Bears are done because they're done. The Broncos are done because Russell Wilson is washed, cooked, whatever the fuck you want to say. He sucks. The Patriots aren't doing shit this year. So you got some of those teams, right? The Cardinals, you knew they were going to suck, and that's part of the intention. The Vikings, they might play a little bit better as the year goes along, but they're not a great team. Last year was a bit of a fluke. But you got some teams there like the Bengals and the Chargers are sitting at 0-2, and you're like, how the hell does that happen? And you'll wonder, for some of these teams, how much are they impacted by not playing more in the preseason? We see that throughout the league, right? In terms of some of these games are pretty brutal to watch because the defensive quality of play is not very good. And it makes you wonder if these teams should try and risk it a little bit more and play a little more in the preseason, or are they just acknowledging that these first couple of games are basically glorified preseason games? But for the Bengals and the Chargers, the season's not over by any stretch of the imagination, but the Bengals have got to figure it out quickly offensively. You just made a huge investment in Joe Burrow, and through 2 weeks it has not looked good. For the Chargers, is Justin Herbert share some blame here? Certainly. Does the defense share some blame? Absolutely. But you're talking about Brandon Staley, if this shit doesn't turn around soon, that dude's got to go because you're squandering an opportunity there, and you cannot allow the Chiefs get any distance on you whatsoever in that division, because that AFC is a fucking dogfight. So, those are 2 teams I do expect to turn it around at some point, talking about the Bengals and the Chargers, but they better start getting to work, because if they don't, it's going to get real ugly for them real quick this year.